We're here in the Ulster Museum at the 141st Annual Royal Ulster Academy Exhibition, and I'm delighted to be joined by Ciaran Gallagher, Associate of the Royal Ulster Academy. Ciaran, it's great to meet you again and to see your work here exhibited, but it's not your first time associated with the Royal Ulster Academy.
No, and thanks, Noelle, it's great to be here. I had a previous painting some years ago, I think it was like 2008, that whenever I was in art college, I put a painting in.
And you were awarded a prize?
Yeah, I got the Irish News Award for depicting a painting or a piece depicting the theme Ireland Today.
And what was the piece reflecting?
I painted my kitchen, a large oil painting of a scene with the kitchen that I was living in at the time in the house on the Ormer Road, and I put in, different symbols and things to do with stuff that was going on at the time. And a friend of mine at the time that was living in the house, he sat in the kitchen table and painted him in as well. And just sort of quite a colourful painting, and the way I painted it reflected my drawing practice at the time that I was developing, which was, and still is, this sort of fairly detailed line drawings of people in environments, and I do them quite quickly in situ, and they tend to be quite strong perspective lines and stuff, but in maybe like a warped fisheye lens, because of the way I try to piece everything into the painting as I'm sitting there.
And you've become known as a satirical artist, particularly in recent times. You have your own unique style, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I would say that there's always this cartoony element to my work, because the stuff that I do is, hand drawn at the start, and I tend to make heads slightly bigger and the warped perspective, if there's anything like that in the piece. It sort of adds to this cartoony kind of thing. And also because I was involved with painting murals when I started out as an artist, that has stuck with me, and I might make some like social commentary or something, and I use humour within the pieces,
Your work has reflected a lot of social commentary, and particularly political chaos that we find ourselves in. And I was intrigued by not just the subject matter, but the profile that you got because of your murals, particularly with the Rishi Sunak and the Liz Truss, the election campaign, and how spot on you were,
I mean, a big part of my work would be commissioned art pieces that are designed as street art murals, and as you say, they have that satirical side to them. So I completed this series of paintings that lined up with the campaign reshuffling of the different Prime Minister positions that was happening. At the start, Boris was getting thrown out, and people wanted to know who the next person was going to be to line up and take the job for a few weeks. And Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak were the two main contenders. And myself and the owner of the Duke of York, this guy Willie Jack, who has been a real patron for me over the years, and has commissioned me to do a lot of murals for his bars and the areas around in the Cathedral Quarter. And he asked me to do this artwork, sort of open-ended, to deal with this theme. And we decided on this boxing match between these two people, and that was the first mural that I did. And I didn't really think it was going to make too much of a splash, but it just so happened that the day that it was put up, those two contenders happened to be in Northern Ireland trying to promote themselves. They were actually in Belfast that day. News media from all over the world had representatives here, and they didn't have a whole lot to look at, and they ended up using that image as the background for a whole host of different news channels and newspapers and stuff all over the world, and it went as far as India. It was in the Indian Express.
It was very powerful to witness. How did you feel when you saw, your work on the international news? And I know you were interviewed on quite a number of occasions. How did
Yeah, it was surreal. It was really strange. It was exciting. It was sort of,
because you created there was a real appetite for it because people were curious, and you were making comments like, watch this space, because of the nature of the election campaign. People were hungry, to hear and see what was happening. But you entertained everyone in terms of what you did and how you did it. Very, very clever. So Ciaran, when did it dawn on you that this is really what you want to do? Was there a moment in time, a conversation, a place that you were, or something that you saw that really inspired you to go down this route, this journey?
my parents were always very supportive of my artistic efforts. I had an uncle, my father's brother, who I never met, but he was an artist, Eugene, and he left a series of paintings that were around our house, growing up. And a sketch pad, you could look through it and see all these really well drawn portraits and things that he'd worked out, and anatomical drawings and drawings of cows and stuff, where you could really see what was going on underneath their skin and stuff. And you could see he was also this sort of technician, or well on the way to becoming, and maybe after that I was brought very young to France, and I remember we were in Paris and we went to the Louvre, and I remember seeing all these paintings, huge paintings. I don't remember the exact, what they were exactly, but maybe like the Raft of Medusa or whatever, that scale, which was just like 30-foot paintings, and all in these large halls, and people in quiet reflection going up and observing these masterpieces with all the drama and the technical ability, and the reverence that people held for them. And I remember being really blown away by that, and in awe of like how these things were created, and if somebody could do that, could I at some point ever create anything like that? So I suppose then I thought, I'm going to go on this journey. And I got a break fairly early, because I had been practicing the drawing and stuff. I seen these mural artists working on a mural on the side of the road. It was on the Falls Road, and I was on the bus, and I jumped off and I asked them, could I help them? And they were like, no problem, because it was like a whole group of people that were doing this, like the Guernica, recreation of the Guernica, Pablo Picasso's Guernica. And I ended up working with them, and we worked over a few years on a whole series of projects that they were involved with. And it was sort of like a cross-community group of mural artists, headed by Danny Devaney, who is very well known, and he would have been more of a political mural artist, and he worked with people from different sides of the community for this cross-community group. And we did a lot of different stuff. Worked for had stuff in backgrounds of films and stuff like that there. So I enjoyed that, and I really sort of cut my teeth learning how to paint on a large scale when I was working with them. So whenever I did eventually get around to going to art college, my first instinct was to work really large. So, I think that painting that I put in the REA that year was like 6 foot and to me that was nearly smaller. It was like scaling down slightly. And my work has got smaller, I think, especially the stuff in the exhibitions.
It seems to me that, from looking at your work and looking at how it has evolved over the years, you've always had a healthy interest in politics, a healthy interest in a sense of community and identity, but also in this idea of a sense of place, and that's very important, in where you place your characters, whether they're internal landscapes or exterior. The other thing as well was that you went on then to win the silver medal, and I know that the presentations were made in the RUA HQ because of lockdown. It was a very different time. And you now have become the artist in residence, or the resident artist in the Royal Ulster Academy in Rosemary Street. So how's that working out for you?
Yeah, it's great, because for a long time I was working either at home or whatever space people would give me short term for whatever mural project I had on. And it was sort of a bit of a challenge sometimes, getting keys for places and getting access to water and electric, and the weather generally is pretty cold, and so it's nice to have somewhere that I can bring all my gear and stuff and paints and all this, pile them up, and have several projects potentially on the go at the same time. And gives me a base, and also I've sort of been teaching out of the RUA as well. So
yes. So you've been running life drawing classes.
Yeah.
With focus very much on anatomy, because that's
Yeah.
what you're really, really interested in. So it's very, very disciplined, in terms of what you're doing, but also teaching other people. And I suppose too, we were talking earlier as well about, I think there's an element and an emphasis on artists to constantly be their best, or constantly review their practice, and to look at ways in which they can learn and improve, how they maybe use the materials or the media or the process that they use, but also to learn from other artists. And we were talking earlier about, finding a tribe, and I suppose the lovely thing as well is that within the context of the annual exhibition here, the Royal Ulster Academy exhibition, that suite and programme of talks and tours and masterclasses is something that really is inspiring, not just for the audiences, but also for the artists that participate as well. And you've facilitated both the sources of inspiration in terms of your own practice, and you've spoken to a very enthusiastic audience and shared very generously your own practice and your own journey as an artist. But you've also as well facilitated a masterclass as part of the RUA programme. And it seems to me that that's something that you've really enjoyed, because we talked about how difficult it is for artists to sustain themselves and nourish themselves, particularly because it's an isolating activity. You're working very much on your own, so that interaction, you found it very, very beneficial.
Yeah, I've the last year has been great because, as we said there, it can be very isolating. In the studio for years on your own, you don't get a whole lot of feedback, and you might be involved in exhibitions or things or putting murals up, but actually it goes up and then you move on to the next thing, and outside of social media you mightn't have any interaction with people about the work.
And how important is it for you to get feedback on your work? Because really within the mural context, it's out there, it's very public. You can't ignore it. But how important is it for you as an artist that is transitioning between the two, between the gallery and the outdoors, to get feedback, and constructive feedback at that?
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if a lot of feedback from your peers is a good thing at all, because I'm not really doing it for anybody in particular. I'm doing it for myself, and sometimes if I am worried about other people's opinions about what it is, I might sort of be hesitant, I might sort of censor myself or try to create work for other people in mind, or so sometimes I wonder if it's a strength that it, you know.
I think it probably is. I think that's a good solid place to come from. As opposed to when you look at patrons, you know, when you look at those that fund the role of the artist and the work that they do, and you'd mentioned about, you know, that you've had a very busy time between your murals and between the commission pieces as well, and you know, in order to be an authentic artist, to be able to have that confidence that the marks that you're making are not being, you know, they're not predictable, but they're not for anyone else other than yourself. Yes, people can enjoy and commission work, but surely each artist has their own mark, their own DNA, if you like, you know, too.
And those are informed by my influences.
Yes.
You know, so.
And who would be your main influences?
You know, there's certain painters, figurative painters, that I would gravitate towards again and again, and you know, some of them could be like, you know, Norman Rockwell, or you know, this, you know, narrative, you know, pieces that he created, where they have these characters that you can really relate to, and their expressions, and there's like a story embedded in the painting. And I love this coming from the animation background, and I feel like I'm a storyteller in some way.
Absolutely.
So I find actually I've done murals in the past that actually have a whole timeline within them, and they play out like a storyboard that goes the whole way across the wall. They're nearly like a comic strip or something. So I like this idea that there's sequential images happening, or even when I do a single painting, that it alludes to more. It's talking about a story, or maybe I'll have a blurb underneath it that explains a bit more about the character in it.
Yeah, because there's something about your pieces, and I'm even looking at this piece here, you know, the Last Train, and they do look like characters that are playing a part on a stage, you know, and that there's often social commentary that's, you know, subliminal in your work. And I do remember as well last year's piece, I'm talking about the social issues about food banks and you know, how you actually recreate and stage, you know, your characters in environments of your making, obviously, that you have chosen very carefully. So it's almost been not unlike the anatomy context, but like the anatomy of a painting, how you build, how you sculpt, how you place the characters. And you mentioned as well, you know, I asked were they of any one person, and you mentioned that we're a conglomeration of people that you've known or experience that you've had, or, you know, it seems to me that you draw your inspiration from the people around you as well as the environments.
Absolutely, yeah.
And have you preferred medium that you use?
Well, I tend to use acrylic because of the
Immediacy.
background in the mural arts, and you know, because it dries so quickly, and I can varnish it and get it up, you know, the same day that I've been painting on it. But I do enjoy the working with oil paint and the sort of your ability to edit, you know, as you go. But I would say that behind it all, there's the base of my work is drawing, and I tend to work things out in pencil before I ever apply paint onto the work.
That scaffolding
Yeah.
is very important, and it's very obvious. You know, there's a lovely linear quality in the pieces that they stand alone, you know, irrespective of what palette you use as well.
Yeah, and also some of these paintings that I've been doing for the exhibitions, they're slightly different to me. Nearly the subject matter is the colour in them as well. So although the characters in them, and there's a narrative, and there's maybe some theme about alienation in crowded areas, and how we all are like ships in the night passing each other, all glued into our own worlds and devices and books and things. There's also this, I'm playing about with colour schemes in each painting. So one of the weaknesses that I felt that was in my work up to a few years ago was that I was using every colour under the sun, and people were talking about using limited palettes, and I didn't really do that.
You've encapsulated the emotional isolation and a disconnection.
Yeah, and I would say that, you know, in Mateusz, the chef painting, the colour palette for that was the Zorn palette, which is red, black, white, and yellow ochre. Mm-hmm. And you I strictly kept to those boundaries within that, mm-hmm. and it gives like a cinematic feel to the painting.
That was very obvious. And do you think that's coming directly from your interest in animation, or did that set you on the road to animation? You know,
well, again, when I was involved with the animation stuff, there was a lot more, in my mind anyway, there was a lot more conversation about the technical side of things. So people would have been talking about lighting and colour studies for individual shots and backgrounds and matte paintings and stuff. And also the anatomy was very important for people, because, like, you know, they're under much more scrutiny, you know, mm-hmm. than maybe in the art world. In the galleries, people are not necessarily going to point to something and say the anatomy or the colours are off and that. So again, with these, they were sort of influenced by this guy James Gurney. Mm-hmm. He's like he teaches online and YouTube and stuff, and he talks a lot about limited palettes. And, you know, it's as old as the hills, you know.
But it's a discipline, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a discipline that if you can manipulate and create, you know, with a limited palette, you know, then you can achieve great things. And I suppose, you know, particularly when you look at about the various scales, you know, the scale of a piece that is going into a gallery, although depending on the size of the walls, I mean, with some huge pieces here. But when you look at making that transition between a painting that someone's going to hang in a domestic setting, you know, quite small, you know, on a piece then, you know, on a wall outside, and indeed you have been creating, you know, almost like, it's almost like these modular, you know, mirrors that you walk in and you're part of, you're completely encased. I'm just thinking of the mirrors that you've created, you know, over the years. Which would you prefer? Which scale would you prefer to work on?
You know, there's a certain freedom that comes with working in a smaller scale, because I can spend a lot more time and get more done. And then there's a physical aspect of working large that it just takes more time. It takes more paint. I have to mix up more stuff, and it's more tiring. So,
and if you're working outside as well,
yeah.
You know, you're very much limited to the weather, you know.
So you tend to be able to focus in and get a lot more detail in the smaller pieces as a result. And then also, you know, people are going to scrutinise the smaller work more, whereas with the mural work, you know, people tend not to going to look at it too closely. They're going to be like at least 10 metre or 10 feet back, you know, so.
And it's interesting too, because when you talk about that the role, you know, of an artist and creating work and having to isolate in order to create it in many cases, and then the sense of community when you are part of, you know, an extended family that are doing murals. Your work, would you describe it as territorial in that it is specific to one place, you know, because the themes to me seem to be appropriate in so many contexts?
Maybe I've been asked to move certain murals at times, and I'm not that happy about, you know, like if maybe somebody has a mural one place and they have another space that they think it would look quite nice in or whatever.
I imagine if you're going to do a mural, or, you know, certainly with your commissions, you would be very thorough about and disciplined about, you know, where the mural is going to be, the context in which it's going to be seen, the different perspectives as well, just from looking at your work before and seeing and hearing you speak about it.
I'm not keen on moving stuff about once I know where it's going to go, and maybe that's kind of part of a challenge about putting stuff in exhibitions where you're not really sure where it's going to be hung, or it's not so much location. You don't know where it's going to be, or how the lighting's going to fall on it.
You must feel very proud of the profile that your work has got. You know, there's been a big push from the tourist board to try and sell, particularly Belfast and Northern Ireland in general, and to see your work in situ in places where people are gathering, particularly when it wasn't easy to gather, particularly during lockdown. But you must feel good when you see that the social settings and people going up and having their photographs taken beside your work, they've become a statement in themselves almost.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the driving force behind that has been the owner of the Duke of York, Willie Jack, who's done more, certainly that I've seen, than anybody else.
He's really your patron?
Yeah. And, without him and his support, I would have been lost.
And would he give you complete free range, to do what you want? Or would he have some ideas that the two of you would think together?
Yeah, he'll phone me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and brainstorm things, and we'll talk about it, and I'll go away and think about things. Or there's other times whenever I feel like I'm given, a wall or whatever, and asked to do whatever I want, and that allows me to sort of the free rein. And there's other times maybe he has something in mind, and we'll sort of brainstorm around that,
And how do you structure your day as an artist? I mean, you're a full-time artist, so how does that work for you in terms of your daily routine? If you're managing both, studio space, dedicated work, outdoor work, then you're teaching your classes. How does that?
Oh, it's a disaster. Every day's different, but most of the time it would be work in the studio. And try and get as many hours in, as possible, and try not to get distracted. I actually, when I'm under pressure and I have to get something finished, I tend to work at night. I drift into night working, just because there's no distractions at night, and during the day I find it's very difficult to apply myself to extended hours working. But really, I need to be doing an 8-hour shift working, to get anything real, important done.
And then I suppose because of the exhibition and the Royal Ulster Academy show and being in the museum here, there's been a lot of activity in terms of events and the programme, the education programme. And I know that you've enjoyed being in and out listening to fellow artists. What do you aspire for yourself within the next few years in terms of your own career as an artist?
I suppose I'd like to develop more of the paintings on canvas that I've been doing.
Yes.
Because that has been one of the things that I've neglected because of some of the opportunities that have come along with commissioned work. And in some ways I see myself as a bit of an illustrator.
Yes.
And it's allowed me to develop my technical, skill or whatever. People say if you want to master something, you have to do 10,000 hours in the studio or in work or whatever, or learning an instrument. With the commission stuff, it was giving me the ability to spend a lot of time working on my craft, and I feel
get paid for it.
And get paid for it. But I feel like now that I have developed a lot of the skills, and I suppose that's never ending, but I've sort of neglected maybe what it is that I'm trying to say on canvas, and I feel like I'm still trying to work that out.
Ciaran, it's been lovely speaking to you and lovely reflecting on some of your journey and the work that you've created. And I wish you the very, very best of luck and continued success in making your mark inside and outside. And the very best of luck with your current exhibition in Sea Holly.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.